Thanks so much. My name is Ju-Hyun once again, and it's wonderful to be here. I'm representing Nodutdol today, which is an organization of anti-imperialist Koreans based in the U.S. along with their comrades. We are organizing along the lines of struggle for national liberation of Korea and, for the ultimate defeat of imperialism, which of course is usually national concern. And that's why, we're always happy to, be here at town halls like this, sharing our experiences, letting you others as well. So as we know, capital as a system requires the endless expansion and profit. And it operates according to very simplistic equations when you really boil it down. Fundamentally, if you want to keep profits high, then you have to keep costs. And the most flexible form of cost is going to be the cost of labor. And so what this means is that you need continual supplies of cheap labor because you actually can't really keep labor very cheap in a static population for very long, right? Over time, workers begin to organize, they gain more skills, they begin to demand more, etc., right? And so these kinds of migration flows that bring continual supplies of cheap labor are really important to the survival of capitalism. We have to understand that it's really essential that the system itself would not exist without. So I think one thing I want to take from that point is that when we talk about the role of state violence in migration, whether that takes the form of conventional warfare, immigration detention, enforcement, we should really understand that not just as state violence, but as ruling class violence and as a form of class movement, right? Because that state does not represent the whole of the interests of the society in a neutral sense, right? They represent the interests of the ruling class. And therefore they enact violence on behalf of the ruling class. And that's why the cops beat us up and they don't beat up the bakers that you work and chase with. The first Koreans arrived actually in the 20th century in 1903. And they arrived as agricultural laborers in Hawaii, which, as we know, is itself an occupied territory, was an independent kingdom that had been overthrown by the United States and then incorporated into its own right. In the case of those Korean migrants, what was going on in Korea at the time was that Japan was in the process of colonizing Korea. And in doing so, one of the key ways that Japan was taking over the Korean economy was domination over its agricultural market. Korea was a peasant society, primarily a rice-producing economy. Japan wanted that rice for itself, and of course, wanted to trade at that price so that they could have the profits go towards Japan rather than just the hands of Korean peasants. And so that's what made Koreans available in the first place, to go to Hawaii as agricultural laborers, right? Because they were people who had those specific skills that, knew how to work the land in those years. And they had been dispossessed of their own land by a process of colonization that was unfolding in Korea at the time. Now, in 1907, that migration actually ended for several decades. And that was a result of the Gentleman's Agreement, which was a kind of informal agreement between the U.S. and Japan, primarily concerning the migration of Japanese nationals to the United States. But by that point, Korea had been incorporated as a Japanese colony, and therefore that agreement extended to them as well. And I think, underlying that is sort of this racial logic to the immigration system in the United States, which has long been very hostile to migrants from Asia, and at the same time, at different junctures, has created opportunities for mass migration because the labor has been required, right? So the most famous example that people know about is Chinese railroad workers in the 19th century. I think we could effectively also argue that in the last 50 years, migration of Asians to the United States has really been driven by that similar need. And we're now seeing that there are efforts to close those ends, right? And actually, some of the first people to come to the U.S. from Korea were coming in two categories. One were known as war brides, and the other were adoptees. So war brides in this context refers to women who were often in the militarized sex trade in Korea, not exclusively, but often. And then there were exceptions made to racialized restrictions in the U.S. immigration system to allow women from Korea and Japan who married U.S. soldiers to then come to the United States. And this is crucial because 1 in 2 Korean families in the U.S. today actually initially got their visas process initiated as a result of a war bride relative who gained her citizenship through marriage. And then the other is the adoption industry. Korea is the largest exporter of children in the entire world. I'm going to say that again, the largest exporter of children in the entire world. It was ground zero for the formation of what is now a global international adoption industry that separates children often from biological family and then exports them, traffics them to the global north, right? To satisfy the needs and the whims of white, typically middle-class families or, in the United States and other similar countries. So more than 200,000 Korean children were exported in this way. And there was actually investigations of ongoing under the South Korean Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Now, they've been paused due to some political issues. But what they found was that out of more than 300 cases of alleged human rights violations, they were able to confirm that in more than 50 of those individual cases, children were taken from family that did not give them up for adoption. So, they needed to rely on these adoption agencies in order to fill the gap in, social services. And then, instead of taking care of those children were sold, right? And that was with the collusion of both the adoption agencies and South Korean government officials. And so it's as a result of that, that 1 in 10 Koreans in the U.S. today is an international adoptee, right? In the case of Korean communities in the U.S., who also have a lot of highly educated people who do migrate here, often in H-1B visas or similar sorts of arrangements, we also need to understand that as a process of brain, because when engineers, when doctors, when other highly educated professionals are taken from countries in the global south, that is the process of underdevelopment playing itself out at an individual level, right? There are many people in this room who, if history had gone differently, you might be somewhere else applying the skills that you have, the education that you have, towards, the development of your mother country, right? Instead, we are here, our labor is being exploited. We don't spend our time improving our native societies. We spend our time making money for a capitalist class that, mostly has a history of waging war against us, right? We talk very quickly about the case of Yoon, which is a campaign that we've been engaged in the last couple of months. Yoon is a student at Columbia. She came to the U.S. when she was 7. She is a permanent resident. And in spite of that, she, along with Margaret Kimberley, were targeted by name in a memo from Marco Rubio for deportation, right? And the State Department is now arguing that it has the right to strip people at their green cards, which, we know that it does not right. Some of the good news that's come out so far is that earlier this week, a judge announced a preliminary injunction that will prevent ICE from detaining or arresting Yoon for the duration of a federal lawsuit because she is currently suing the Trump administration. But this case is not yet over, and it's something we have to continue to engage with because I think, as we all understand, what's being done to the students is both an attempt to attack the movement for Palestine. It is also a weather balloon to test whether or not this administration is able to unleash a more comprehensive attack, not only on immigration, but also on progressive revolutionary movements overall, right? Because if they can deport green card holders, they're actually very close to deporting people that were born, as right? And lastly, I think, one point that I really want to impress about Yoon case is that it's really also about the capacity for migrants to have any kind of political voice or power in the United States, right? This is something that your comrade Hope was referencing earlier as well. Because the terms of the arrangement right now are that you could come here, you can make us money, you can espouse our ideas, right? And ours are based, the middle class. However, if you attempt to assert any kind of independent political line, that is what you need running power, right? And so at stake is really our capacity to have longer term political struggle, and to, build the sorts of movements that we need to create transformation, revolution in the longer term.